Hello there, and a very, very warm welcome to you on this beautiful Tuesday lunchtime to our community building book and tonic banter Facebook Live. That's a bit of a mouthful, isn't it? My name is Jessica Redland, and I'm joined by two of my fellow Boldwood authors. You just want to give a little wave as I say your name, Jo Bartlett. And Helen Rolfe, and they will introduce themselves just in a moment. Now, Jo, Helen and I have actually known each other since way before we joined Boldwood Books. We joined together about 9 years ago, a little bit longer than that for myself and Jo, as a writing collective who met virtually called the Right Romantics, and we were 10 aspiring writers who all joined together to kind of be a bit of a support network as we all started on our publication journey. And it's amazing to be kind of 9 years later. Every single member of that group has several books published, and three of us are now part of the Boldwood family. Now, today's topic is all about building communities, and we welcome questions. So if you do have a question or a comment to make, do pop them in. I'm kind of comment question master. I'll be keeping an eye on those and feeding them in. And you don't just have to ask us questions about building communities. That's going to be the focus of the session. But if there is anything else you'd like to ask us, please do type that in. And just before I move on to Jo and Helen for their introductions, a warm welcome to Karen, Sharon and Grace saying hello to us. So Sharon Booth is another Right Romantic and a fabulous writer. If you haven't checked out her books, do so. So let's give a little introduction and a brief overview of what you've written. Now, I had said I'd start with me, but because I've been wittering, let's go to Helen first and we'll come back to me later. So Helen, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Thank you, Julie. I've written, well, at the moment I'm writing book 27, which I find quite hard to believe, actually. I think I've got 24 books out at the moment, and they're all in the genre of women's fiction and romantic fiction. I've recently brought over quite a few books from my backlist to Boldwood Books, and we've got the Heritage Co series with them and the New York Ever After series, which is republishing at the moment. I've got another 2 out this week. And yeah, that's me.
Thank you, Helen. And you might have noticed that Helen said Julie right at the beginning. She's not being strange, not knowing me. Julie's my real name, Jessica's my writing name, and I don't kind of particularly hide that, but just in case you're thinking, who did she say hello to? It's inevitable. We do this all the time. Jo, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hi, Jessica. I'm glad Helen did that, because you know it's always on the tip of my tongue to say it. Lovely to be here with you both today. I'm just slightly behind Helen. I've just submitted book 24 to my editor, and I'm about to start book 25, which, like Helen, I can hardly believe that it's come to that point. After struggling the first couple of books, and you think, wow, are you ever going to finish? And it's quite unbelievable, isn't it, to sort of getting up towards the 30 mark over that time. Like Helen as well, I write romance and women's fiction, although I have done one kind of murder mystery, and that's something sort of mystery that I'd like to do a bit more of in the future. So I'm thinking about maybe expanding my horizons in that respect, but at the moment all the books are in either romance or women's fiction. Got quite a lot of series, a couple of standalone, but most are series, and most of those are set in either Cornwall or Kent, and we'll talk a little bit about all of that later. But yeah, lovely to see everyone today. And back to you, Jessica.
Lovely, thank you, Jo. So I write uplifting stories of love, friendship, family and community, and I write in 2 different settings: Hedgehog Hollow, which is a fictional rescue centre, a hedgehog rescue centre in the Yorkshire Wolds nearby, and Whitsborough Bay, which is a fictional North Yorkshire seaside resort, predominantly modelled on Scarborough where I live, but with elements of Whitby and Robin Hood's Bay up the coast. Some of my books are light, fun reads, and others are more deeper, emotional ones that may well have readers reaching for the tissues, but I always guarantee an uplifting, heartwarming ending. Now, I feel like I'm trailing a little bit behind Helen and Jo here, because I've only written 17 books, so not quite.
Jessica, come and get your finger out.
What have I been doing with my life?
I think if we went on word count, you might be at the front, because I think
this is true. I tend to kind of
think you do write longer books, don't you? Whenever people ask me, it's very hard to remember, and I actually have to go and count half the time. I say I can't remember, and I go and count all the series, and there's inevitably a couple that I forget.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
It is hard, because somebody just asked me the other day what book number I was on. I was like, 15, 16, 17, 18. I'm not really sure. It's in the teens somewhere. So, but yeah, I mean, I've had 15 published so far through Boldwood, 4 Hedgehog Hollow and 11 Whitspur Bay. But book 16 is out a week today, which is the one that's just showing there in the little picture, Chasing Dreams at Hedgehog Hollow. And book 17 will be out in September, which is the final Hedgehog Hollow book. So on to our first question. We all write books with a strong sense of community in them. What is it that attracts you to writing books like this? And why do you think these appeal to the readers? We'll start with you again, Helen.
Oh, thank you, Jessica. I think it really appealed to me because it's almost like going back in time a little bit. So I can remember when I was little, just the way all the neighbours' kids just played together and everyone knew each other. You kind of were in and out of each other's houses. And so I think it's like winding back the clock. And I love the idea. I mean, it's not really like that nowadays, I don't think. Maybe some places are. But I love the idea that you kind of know other people and they help each other. And you've got your little community of shops and businesses. And everyone sort of, you have like a local pub or a restaurant. I just really like the idea. I think it's just really welcoming, and I think readers would share that view. Is that what you think? Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. What about yourself, Jo? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, no, I think very, very similar. I guess it's that sense of friendship and safety and well-being that perhaps we don't have, often in today's, it's quite disparate, and friends are quite often widespread, aren't they? Or, a lot of people's contact is maybe through social media, and they don't have that same kind of, like Helen says, it's almost like a 1950s feel to some of the community settings. I think where pre-social media, where your interaction was about what was going on in the community. People didn't travel so much either, so it was very much the hub of your life. And I think there's that sort of sense. And as a writer, I think what's nice is in a series, you want to kind of have the continuation of your characters. Yeah. And if you have it in a community that you've built, you can have those dynamics, those relationships between members of the community. But I know from feedback from readers that they like that sense that they get to know the characters, they become like friends to them as well. And maybe sometimes in their own life they're not having that contact on a day-to-day basis with real life friends, but they can immerse themselves in a story and almost feel like that they're part of that community themselves. And some of the things, over the last few years that have been very difficult for people with the pandemic and obviously the threat of war and everything else, you want that kind of safety and that kind of going back into time when everyone cared for everyone. And I think that's what appeals so much about those community settings to the readers and to us as writers, I guess, as well.
Yeah, I think you both hit the nail on the head with the nostalgia aspect of it being such a big thing. I mean, for me, as to why I wrote them, I actually didn't specifically set out to write books that had a strong community, but it just happened for me when I wrote my very first book, which is New Beginnings at Seaside Blooms. Part of it is set in a florist shop on Castle Street in Whitspur Bay. And suddenly that emerged as a warm and friendly business community full of independent businesses, people who would help each other out, and that community feel. And I've now written 5 books featuring a business that's set on Castle Street. And I personally get such a buzz from writing them because as a writer, I feel like I'm part of that community. I used to have my own teddy bear shop in Richmond in North Yorkshire, and that was on a street full of independent shops and businesses. And although there wasn't the same strong community that there was like Castle Street, it would have been lovely if there was. There were a few business owners who very much looked out for each other, supported each other, popped in on quiet days, said hello, sympathised when you'd had a quiet day of sales or it had been raining and there was nobody out. And so that kind of support really, really resonated with me. And so I've put that in greater volume in Castle Street. And again, when I developed Hedgehog Hollow, it was also very much a natural thing. Samantha was welcomed into the community by her new friends, Rich and Dave, who she lodged with. And when a few things happened and Hedgehog Hollow became a victim of some vandalism and some attacks, the community all rallied together and made sure that the rescue centre could get up and running, and then keep running when a few things happened, spoiler free, a little bit later. And you've talked about kind of comments from readers, and I get comments saying that readers want to shop on Castle Street, they want to have a scone in the Starfish Cafe, they want to visit Hedgehog Hollow, and that recurring theme is very much around the atmosphere, and I really do think there's that sense of escapism and feeling like they know the setting and it's an extension of home, and when they do need to escape from all these awful things that are going on in the world, they can just immerse themselves in a community filled with book like ours and like so many others, and just feel happy and warm and loved and cared for and surrounded by friendly people. So
I mean, I think I'm the same in that I didn't set out to write a series at all. My first few books weren't in a series. And then my first series, written quite a while ago, was one I set in a fictitious town, Magnolia Creek, which is in Australia. And when I started to write the first book, I just had all these secondary characters coming in, and I thought, I really want to tell their story as well. And it just ended up being a little sense of community. Like, I could imagine the town. I based it on a place I'd been to before called Sassafras, which is in the Dandenong Ranges, and very pretty town and quite small. And I think you feel like you just want to tell everyone else's stories. And as a reader, they want to hear them as well. So like you, Jessica, you get readers saying, oh, can we hear from Barney, or can we hear from Lois, or, Daniel, somebody, they'll give you a name and you think, oh, I hadn't really thought about that. And sometimes you don't particularly want to write their story, but other times you think, actually, that might be a really good idea.
Yeah, and I've read I think the first 3 of your Magnolia Creek books, and it really is that lovely sense of, it is that real lovely sense of community. You definitely do get that feel for that, and even in a part of the world I don't particularly know, I felt like I did know it from reading.
I think that's nice, and that's like reading a series. I'm reading Debbie Maycomber at the moment, and she's got a real sense of community in her Seed to Cove series. And I just came to the end of book 2, and I wanted to read something completely different, not one of her books this time, but because I want to know what happens with the characters and the community. They're all banding together over various different issues, and people have got things going on. I'm kind of really tempted to read another one, so I'm not sure whether I will yet, or whether I'll have a break. I don't know. But you do get really drawn into the community, I think, and I think that's part of what is really special about writing about small towns and places where everyone interacts.
No, perfect. Now that I'll just pause because that links us nicely into a question that's come in from Karen Louise Hollis, who says, I'd like to ask which books you've all read and enjoyed recently. I've read books by all of you and loved them, so thank you very much, Karen, very kind of you. So Helen, you've just talked about your Debbie Maycomber book. Are there any others that you've read and enjoyed recently?
Now, what else have I read? Oh, Hedgehog Hollow, of course. I've read the first 3 of those. I've got a couple more to read, and I've read Cornish Midwife as well. What else have I read? I'm about to read a Christmas one, I think, because I like to go a little bit out of season.
Well, you're nearly at Christmas in July with your Australian connections there, so
yeah. I mean, I think it's just nice throughout the year, isn't it? I think Christmas is the same as the community feel. It makes you feel cozy and warm, and if you're having a bad day, it's just such an escape. It's and you can feel yourself actually there. You almost feel like you're having another Christmas with the characters.
Yeah, definitely. It was funny because actually when I was writing about or thinking about my answer around communities, Christmas very much did pop into my head because it is such a great time to set the community books. So what about yourself, Jo? What have you been reading recently that you've enjoyed?
I was late to the party, but I just read Last Letter from My Lover by Jojo Moyes. Was the most recent one I read, and I think again it's that sort of nostalgia thing. I'm sort of being attracted to the 50s in different ways at the moment. I don't know whether it's just all to do with what happened at Jubilee and those sort of kind of historical things, but it's that kind of simpler life where I think there weren't all the complexities of social media and the different things like that. So. I quite enjoy, in the same ways that readers enjoy going back to the community, I quite enjoy at the moment going back to those. I'd like to write something. Actually, 2 of my aunts have an amazing story. They're twin sisters, and they went off to Canada together, and one of them became pregnant. And obviously back then it was quite a scandal, and there's a whole story of adoption and things, that the different paths they took and their relationship. I'd love to write a story about that, but I don't know if I'm in depth enough. I'm not too lazy to get all the details right, because I do admire historical novelists for doing that. That's why I've always steered clear from that, because I think actually to get those details right and to get that feeling, that historical feeling right, is really important. In the same way as it's important for us to understand communities to get that feeling right and to appeal to readers. But yeah, so aside from books from our group, which I regularly read, there's a group of 10 of us in the Right Romantics, and I think we read a lot of each other's books. But outside of that, that's probably the one that sticks in my mind most recently that I've enjoyed and been a bit different from. As I'm getting older, I'm maybe moving away myself from some of the romantic fiction that I might have read in the past, and looking at characters, books like people like Judy Lee and Maddie Please as well, who are also with Boldwood authors who write about older characters. I'm enjoying reading their novels as well, because I'm getting older myself, so I'm identifying more with the mother and even the grandmother figures now than I am with the lead protagonist in some of the other sort of romance novels, really.
Yeah, for me, I haven't done a lot of reading recently. I've had 2 very tight deadlines. So I'm actually reading one of Jo's at the minute, and I've been reading it for ages. Nothing to do with the book not holding my interest, just absolute lack of time to sit down and do any reading. And it's the 4th Cornish Midwife one. And I'm going to get the title wrong because it was a spring surprise for the Cornish Midwife, but it's changed to... Jo?
A surprise delivery, I think.
That's it. And so absolutely loving that. I'm probably about 2/3 of the way through that now. So but I really haven't read anything for the past 3 months. One of the problems of being an author is sometimes you don't quite find the time to read as much as you would like to, because the deadlines come first. So we'll dig into another of our questions. Have you ever lived somewhere with a strong community, either in childhood or as an adult? So, Jo.
Not really, because I always lived in what I call the proper countryside. So growing up, our nearest next door neighbour was half a mile away. So we were very sort of spread out in terms of the community. But I think our community was more about shared interests. So my sister was very good. I was terrible, but I just tagged along at riding horses. I was quite scared, really, but I tagged along because I wanted to be in with my older sister and the in crowd. But we spent a lot of our weekends and a lot of our free time at horse shows, and there was a kind of group of probably about 20 of us that went regularly to these things, and that almost gave a sense of community. In fact, I wrote my first ever attempt at a novel, was a blatant rip-off of Julie Cooper's Riders, but based on our group of people, and it was called A Scandal, I think. But what was great, we used to go to the horse shows every weekend, and they'd all rush out and want to hear the latest chapter of the book. So they were kind of the first people that encouraged me to write the story, and it was great fun. But we had a real sense of community in that group, and I think it was lovely because we knew each other, we knew what was going on in each other's lives, and we spent a lot of our free time together. So although we didn't necessarily live in the same village, that shared interest actually gave a real sense of community, and was a huge part of my childhood. As an adult, again, I live in a village, but very much on the edge, not in the kind of centre of the village, sort of a bit further away from everybody. But my sister lives in a beautiful village where my children also went to nursery. So there's a real sense of community. My daughter lives in that village now, and there's a real sense of community there. And the Jubilee, they all fully came together, and all the houses were themed and decorated. There's very much a sort of understanding that everybody, my sister knows everybody in her village, and there's a Facebook groups you get where anything happens, it's everyone in the village immediately knows that it's going on as well. So so I've been kind of in touch with those things, but not sort of personally, I guess, entrenched, because we always lived where there was room for horses, so we're always a bit further out from the community itself, really.
Yeah, no, I completely understand that. Although it sounds absolutely beautiful where you've lived. For me, the strongest community was probably as a child, and kind of it's probably to do with the time as well. I was brought up in a market town called Gisborough, which is in Teesside, and my family lived on a kind of late 60s, early 70s built house estate, lots around there, and that type of house very much appealed to young families. And there were 2 streets together, Osprey Close and Swallow Close, that were kind of a right angle to each other. and both were surrounded by open fields. And it was one of those things, all the kids knew each other, all the parents knew each other, and there'd always be somebody to play with. So you could go out and go on a bike ride with someone, or build dens. We played Kirby a lot. And it didn't matter what you fancy doing, you would find somebody who could do it with you. And I do remember particularly we've just had the Golden Jubilee, but and we did nothing around here, I'm ashamed to say, but the Silver Jubilee in 1977, I do remember bits of. I was only 5 at the time, but the 2 streets had a massive street party with all the tables laid out. All the children got dressed up. I was a fairy. My older brother was a wounded soldier. We decorated bikes and had races. But I had a bit of a trauma, which still haunts me today. There was a Find the Sweets competition, and they'd hidden sweets all over the 2 streets, and you had to go around and find them. And they were like everywhere, packets of sweets. And I, was only 5, didn't have very big hands, so I ended up like not able to carry all my sweets. And like a right muppet, I went and put them on my doorstep, thinking, I'll be fine, I'll get them later. And of course, some other kids will have come along and gone, wow, look at that big stash of sweets, and took all of my sweets. And so I sobbed my heart out for that. And my older brother wasn't too impressed because my mum made him give me some of his stash. So stupid. And it was one of those things again, to have really heavy snowfalls in the winter, and all the parents would be out shoveling and the kids would be out helping them, but end up building snowmen instead. We had a bonfire at the end of the street every year, and it was very much this community atmosphere where everyone knew everybody. And I've never experienced anything like that since then, but it does exist because what you've just described, where your daughter lives, Jo, and my mum and dad live in a village where there's just so much going on all the time. And so that would be an aspiration to live somewhere like that again. What about yourself, Helen?
Well, much like yourself, Jessica, I remember a real sense of community back in the day. So back in the 70s, I was born in 73. So I was 3 at the Jubilee, and I remember it was street parties. We didn't do anything this time either. So we lived in a road, it was called Hillyfields in Dunstable, and I lived there till I was about 11. And so all the houses were around the edge of the street. There were quite a lot of them, maybe, 50, 60 houses, but they were all around the edge. And then there was a massive green in the middle. So the road kind of went round the green. And so all the kids every day would just play on the green. So every parent from their house could see the kids on the green every day. And you'd basically just play that. You'd always have someone to play with, like what you said. And your mum would just yell for you to come in for tea. And then you'd go out again. And I grew up with 2 brothers, and we had the best time on those. There were some ditches on the green. So all the neighbourhood kids used to fill the ditches in the autumn with all the leaves, and then we'd climb the trees and jump off. And games like that. It was just so much fun. And like you said, when it snowed, everyone would be out building the snowmen. And I think my next door neighbour, he built an igloo in their front garden, which was just so impressive. And we got to camp out in that. And we just would be in and out of each other's houses all the time in a way that you just don't really do now. So the Silver Jubilee, they'd lined up all my mum's got a photo of it somewhere. They'd lined tables up all on the green, and there's pictures of us all, in our party hats, and all the parents around, like serving all the food. And yeah, it was a lot of fun. I don't think you have that anymore, and I would love to find that again. We did kind of have it a little bit in Melbourne. So we had the neighbours used to get together for a Christmas breakfast. So on Christmas Day, because obviously it's warm, you'd all go around and you'd have some champagne and some cold food, and that was kind of quite nice. And then when we lived in Sydney, I was friends with quite a few of the neighbours, and the kids would go to school together around the corner, and we'd all kind of meet up for New Year's and things like that. But yeah, not recently. I'd like to find that again, I think, sometime.
Yeah. It would be lovely, wouldn't it? Definitely. Yeah. So just pause for a few more hellos. So Rosie, Ian Wilfred, Patrick Carr, welcome along. Henriette, Santong. I think that's everybody who has commented, so very warm welcome. Thank you for listening. A lovely comment from Sharon Booth says, just looking at those gorgeous covers and thinking looking at those covers and thinking how gorgeous they are. Those colours are fabulous and really invite you in. Well, thank you very much. And they do actually look really pretty together on that little shelf, all 3 of them. Love that. Got a question from Karen again. Says, I'm thrilled to be on blog tours for all your new books, and so we all have a new book out very, very close together. I wondered, do you feel nervous waiting for bloggers to put their reviews up? So I'll start with answering that. Yes, and it doesn't matter how many books I've written, that feeling of nervousness doesn't go away, because they do go up for reviewers and bloggers on NetGalley, and some of the non-blog tour reviews come through from that. You do get a bit of a feel for how the book is being received. For some reason, the first NetGalley review that comes through is nearly always negative, or very short or not particularly complimentary, and so you then have a panic. But then you get the good ones coming through, so you have a feel for it. But still, on the blog tour, I do get nervous. I read every blog post as it comes through. I comment and thank the bloggers about each of them, but there is this fear that somebody won't like it, and most reviewers are really lovely in the way that they put things, and they do really if they don't enjoy things. But I have had a couple of kind of quite grim comments over time, and they hurt. I had somebody gave me a massive lecture about how disgusted they were that I had a cliffhanger in one of my Hedgehog Hollow books, and that it would have been a 5-star review, but it had dropped down to a 2-star simply for having a cliffhanger, and really told me off. And it makes you feel sick. And I know it's just one person's opinion, but you put your heart and soul into that for months, and to have somebody kind of tear it to shreds, it is very hurtful. But try not to let it hurt you. I think, well, it's more about them and the day that they're having and how they're feeling. Let's put it that way. What about you, Jo? Do you get nervous?
I think, yeah, definitely get nervous with blog reviews. Bloggers' reviews are the only ones that I do read. Over time, as a protective mechanism, I don't read other reviews. I never look on NetGalley, and I don't read Amazon reviews. I look to see what the overall rating is, but I don't read individual reviews, because in the early days I found that if I got a bad one, it would stick in my mind, and it might take half a day's writing from me while I tried to work out, how I could make that right. And what I've realised over time is that you can't please everybody anyway. So there'll be some people who think it's the best book ever written, and some people think it's the worst book ever written. It's ruined their life reading the book. It's the most. I had one I think was the funniest one. This book was free and it was still a waste of money. Yeah. So I, as a protective mechanism, I do not read regular reviews. It's a shame, because I think you probably missed some lovely ones. But the trouble with, I know my personality type, and it doesn't matter if there are 300 5-star reviews. It's the 2 or 3 1- and 2-star reviews that I will remember. So I know myself well enough to know it's not a good idea for me to read reviews, so I don't. But I do read, obviously, the blog tour ones, because it's a different kind of thing that they're doing. And generally, even if they've got a bit of constructive criticism, it tends to be much more sort of well-rounded in terms of the blog tour things. It feels less like a personal thing if there are some comments of things that they maybe didn't like. Some of the books, particularly the midwife ones, can be triggering for people, because there are naturally some things in there that are sometimes difficult for people to read about. So I understand that can be a difficult thing for people as well. But you can't avoid writing about everything that might trigger or upset everybody. Otherwise, the books would be very bland. And I think in romance, we get a bit of a rap for, predictability, which again, I'm not sure how many people would be pleased if the protagonists ended up hating each other at the end. But, I think the answer is to write under a man's name, and then everything's okay. But that's a different story. But yeah, so yeah, nervous definitely. But I just I've learned to deal with them a lot better than I did in the early days, I think.
Sharon's just said I'm with you, Jo, on that. Yeah, no, Sharon doesn't read her reviews either for the same reasons. What about you, Helen? When it comes to blog tours, do you get nervous?
Yes, definitely. And when your book first goes out there, when you've got no reviews, you're just waiting for that first one to come in, and I get really nervous about that. So I read all the ones that are on the blog tour, every single review, and usually they're just really lovely, because usually the reader is maybe has read a few of your books before, and they kind of know your writing, and I find that quite a bit easier. But I'm with Jo. I don't read any other reviews apart from those. My husband reads my reviews, and he's under instruction to not tell me any bad ones, but he can tell me the really lovely ones. Then I'll go and thank the person and things like that. Because I'm the same. I've had some reviews where I've literally just stopped typing, and because I've seen this bad review, and I can't do anything for the rest of the day. And I think, well, what's the point? If I'm that bad and people hate my writing that much, what's the point? And it can take a whole day of writing from you when you're in quite a good mood that Monday morning. I always think, I wonder what that person does for a job. And like, imagine if you went in first thing on a Monday morning and you said to them, you're really rubbish, you can't do that properly, do that better, do that. It wouldn't really set you up for the day, would it? So I avoid those. I think my favourite one was, I think it was on Christmas at the Little Knitting Box, which is my first New York Ever After book. And the title was Dull, Dull, Dull. And she said something about, I don't care who ended up with who, blah, 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 blah. It just moaned about every single thing in the story and gave me 1 star. And then I did go and have a look at the other reviews to make myself feel a bit better. And she'd reviewed some really big author names with similar kind of comments. But she did give 5 stars to her Blackout Blinds on Amazon. So I'm glad she was happy with something, because all the books were 1 star. So
she was sitting in the dark, feverishly typing away.
I know I've got to show, and I'm sure Sharon won't mind me doing this. Sharon, we often joke at she had a negative review like that, and again the person had left several negative reviews, but had given 5 stars to, I think it was some glue sticks, some Pritt sticks or something like that, and you just think, oh my gosh, can't stand the book that was 8 hours, but hey, my Pritt stick worked well. So
our fellow Boltwood author Linda Stacey had an interesting one, but we won't share that here. But
no, we can't say that. So
the only thing they gave a 5-star review to was very, very interesting.
Yeah, a bit of a rude one, but it did give us a giggle. So okay, so back to our questions. Please, can you pick one of your books or one series and just give us a little bit of insight into how you went about creating that community? So I'll start, and I'm going to go for my Starfish Cafe series, and I handily have some props here. So this is except I can't do it right on the camera. Snowflakes Over the Starfish Cafe. That one is the first in the series. Spring Tides at the Starfish Cafe is the second book. And the cafe here, the Starfish Cafe, is on a clifftop location, a little bit outside Whitsborough Bay. It's not somewhere that does actually exist in real life. It's completely from my imagination. And because of the remote location and the potential seasonality of visitors coming to the beach below where there are seals, so more likely to do that kind of when the weather's nice and maybe in pup season, I felt it was really important to build a strong sense of community for the regulars so that the cafe would keep being successful all year round. Now, interestingly, when I first submitted this, the first draft of this to my editor, there wasn't a strong sense of community in it because I was trying to do too much to the story. I was trying to tell 2 stories, and the really insightful feedback from my editor Nia was to take one of the storylines out, which became the basis for the second book, and to focus on the first one only, but to build more about the community, more about the regulars in the cafe, adding in a couple more memorable ones. So I already had a pair of octogenarians, Betty and Tommy, who I loved, but I added in Rodney 10 Sugars, who comes in and orders 1 drink with sugars, hence the name, and Mrs. Sultana. Now, that's not her real name, and I'm not going to give spoilers by explaining why she's called that, but if you do read it, it's quite a lovely story about that, and we have a little bit of a joke quite often about scones and why we give her that name. And she's a favourite of mine and has become a bit of a fan favourite, and so it's about kind of keeping these recurring characters in the book so that even though they're not main characters and we're not necessarily telling their stories, there is this sense of these people who touch your lives when you see them on a regular basis. I also talk about the origins of the cafe, and it's been a family business since the 1960s, and the atmosphere that the current owner, Holly, the atmosphere that her mum wanted to create, which was very much a family feeling where everybody's welcome, whether that's a family buying, big 3-course meal, spending a lot of money, or somebody coming in, excuse me, once a week and just buying one cup of tea. She didn't want it to feel that anybody was pushed out and didn't feel welcome there. And that kind of family atmosphere and that feeling keeps coming back across the books. So once I had the characters, the ambience, the physical appearance of the setting, it very much built from there. And just to kind of keep me right so that I can keep touching upon those little aspects to make people feel like they're there, I do have a Pinterest board where I have things like the sort of pictures that might appear on the wall, the sort of view you might get and everything like that. And I think it just, with your characters, once they're warm and friendly, it just naturally evolves from there. So what about you, Helen? Which one are you going to go for, and tell us about that?
I should go for my Heritage Cove series, because that's the book that will be out next in July, like book 5 of that series. And out of the 3 series I've written, that's the one series that I did plan to be that way. So when I wrote Coming Home to Heritage Cove, which is book 1, I always planned to write more, which I didn't necessarily do with the other 2 series. So a bit like you, I set out to create a bit of a community feel first of all. So I imagined this street in the town or village, and I put various different businesses along there because I thought that would be a good way to create lots of different characters they could have different background stories. Some of that has changed over time with the Waffle Shack coming for book 2. That wasn't there in book 1. And the riding stables, which will be for book 5, that was kind of there. So there's some horses mentioned in the first book, I think, but nothing really much about the stables. That's kind of evolved a little bit. And then I started to think of the characters. So with writing romantic fiction, you've obviously got your romance. So I thought of the 2 main characters first. And once I had the 2 main characters, I started thinking of who else could be involved in their lives. So we have Barney, who's very special. A lot of people love Barney. So he's in his 70s now, and he lives in the same village, and he owns like a house with a really huge barn. And every year he runs the wedding dress ball. It's a charity event, and there's a reason why he does that, but we don't quite know that until you get through book 1, so I don't want to give any spoilers. But his story started to evolve, as well as Melissa and Harvey, who are the 2 main characters. So he's a secondary character, but there's quite a lot of his story in there, and then he appears throughout the book. Like, he's very helpful. He always stops for a chat. Like, Lois will always joke. Lois is his other half, who... There's a story behind that as well. They've known each other for a long time and once married before. And so he appears in a lot of the books and often helps some of the other characters with their stories. So he's very close to Tilly, for example. So in Summer at the Twist and Turn Bakery, he's quite involved in her story there as well. So I think the location and the characters all kind of just came together. And then once I had book 1 and had written that story, you start to, as you're proofreading, getting towards the end of that book, you start to think of who you might want to star in book 2. So book 2, we have Harvey's estranged brother, Daniel, who opens up the Waffle Shack. But he's not really mentioned much in book 1. It was only as I got towards the end, I started to put a little bit in there and think, oh, maybe he'll have a story and come back. And yeah. So that's my series that is kind of, at the moment, I'm still working on the book 5 coming out. And there'll be a book 6 next year, but late next year.
Yeah. Thank you, Helen. And what about you, Jo?
I'll go for the Cornish Midwife series, as that's also the one coming out late a week tomorrow. I think yours is a week today, isn't it, Jessica?
Yeah.
I'm trying to get my head in again with which one it is, because I've just sent in book 6. This is book 5, and I'm just starting book 7. So you're always working with. But I think the location always comes. Thinking about this conversation today, I've realised that the location always comes first to me before the characters or anything. A bit like Helen, really. And I knew I wanted to set a series on the Cornish Atlantic coast, and I'd already set a book there, a one-off book, which is Cornish Summer's Kiss. But I decided to have 3 ports all in a row. Port Agnes, which is where the Cornish midwives are. Port Cara, which is where Cornish Summer's Kiss is, and Port Tremelian, which is another port where things happen, surfing, kind of just a bit like Newquay, I guess. And it's kind of extended from there. And when we talk about books in the future, I'm looking to set some books in the other ports again. So they'll be interrelated, and some of the characters from the midwives will appear, but not necessarily in midwifery books. So the community keeps growing, because it started off as what I intended to be a 4-book series about the 4 who were the 4 main midwives in book 1. It's now 7, and I think it will probably go beyond that. People often tell me that the setting is like a character in itself, so I think the setting is really important in sort of building the community. And much like Helen, you have things that are mentioned in book 1 briefly. St Jude's, the church in Port Agnes, is mentioned briefly as a possible location for a wedding, but it becomes actually pivotal in both books 4 and book 5 in its role in the community. So it's funny how things like that grow from that. And in the midwifery books, I have mums to be and mothers who might appear sort of quite briefly that actually make a recurrence in later books. They come back in, and I think some will be having their second children as the books continue to grow and go on from there. So it's funny. I guess the reason I set it around a kind of working environment is because that's another, as an adult, my biggest sense of community came from being a teacher. I worked in an FE college for 14 years where I met my 2 best friends. And actually getting through the difficult parts of being a teacher, getting through the Ofsted inspections, was all about the people who were around me. And in the midwifery books, the trials and tribulations that the characters go through, it's all about those relationships between the women and the one male midwife, and how they support one another. And I think that's why it was so important for me that the community had a central hub that was work-based. Because as an adult, that's been my biggest sense of community, I guess, working with people. And having those friendships built out of that.
Lovely, thank you for that, Jo. And having read the Cornish Midwife books said so far, it is lovely kind of how everybody does pull together, and you see all the different characters kind of recurring there. Just having a look through some of the comments, and Henrietta commented a little bit earlier when we were talking about the community feel. Since you're so right, Jessica, I love the community feeling, and like I know all of the characters personally, and I think that's with all of the books that we write, is that sense of knowing who they are. Grace Power says, I love a series. And Sharon Bees just has a quick question for you. Do you ever read books outside the romance, women's fiction genres? So very quickly from me, yes. I tend to favour thrillers, psych thrillers, crime books. I will dip in with those. Read more that are romance-based, but I do like those. I used to read a lot of historicals, haven't done for a while, but would like to read some more. What about yourself, Jo?
Yeah, I think actually being part of our writing groups kind of extended my repertoire, because we support. I think I initially read a lot of the kind of books that I wanted to write, like kind of geomancer, those kind of things, were my real kind of heroes when we started out. But actually being in this group has extended my repertoire. Both Sharon's books, I never thought I'd love witches books as much as I love Sharon's Castle Clare series, and I cannot wait for the new series to come out, because I've never been interested in those before. But because Sharon wrote them and I love her writing, that's introduced me to that a new genre. Similarly with Helen Pfeiffer, who writes quite sort of scary crime and horror, and there wouldn't have been something I would have picked up, but now I've extended into reading some other similar authors to her. So I think actually, as you get older, like I said earlier, I think your reading tastes evolve as you kind of evolve as a person. So I think that kind of naturally broadens things out. And at the moment, I'm looking at a lot of crime, more cozy crime, I guess, than hardcore crime, with a view to where I might go with my own writing as I kind of extend forward. But yeah, definitely. Actually, sometimes it's fresher, I think, to read outside of your genre at times than it is to read it in it. But so yeah, I definitely do that.
I know there are some authors that say when they're writing a book, they actually can't read within the genre. They have to read something completely different, because otherwise they just, in their head, it mixes it up a little bit. So I don't find that myself, but I can understand why some might say that. Yeah. What about yourself, Helen?
I don't read massively outside the genre, I must admit. It's funny you mentioned Helen Pfeiffer's books, because when we first started off, obviously we didn't have many books published at all between us, did we? And I read her first one, it terrified me. And then I bought the second one, and I remember texting her or messaging her, and I said, I'm really sorry, Helen, I'm on page 2 and I just don't like it. I can't read it. It's really scaring me. And I still can't walk down the canal and see someone with a dog lead.
Yeah, and no dog. A dog lead and no dog. That's your red flag, isn't it? The dog lead and no dog. Yeah, if you haven't read The Ghost House, read it, but only if you're not frightened.
So I do read. I tend to find, so if I'm writing Heritage Cove, I can't really read another book that's an English Pretty Village series romantic fiction. I tend to steer away and read more something with some older characters, or maybe something American, like just something that's different to what I'm writing. And the same with when I'm writing a New York book. I could then read an English Pretty Village series romantic fiction. Do you see what I mean? Because it's different. I can't read something that's very similar to what I write at the same time, because I find, I don't know, it's just really hard.
Yeah.
Sometimes I think it makes you struggle with what you're writing, because you're kind of thinking, oh, should I be doing that? Should I be doing that? But if you're reading something totally different, you don't think that. So I do need to read more outside my genre, definitely. And my daughter buys just such different books. She's really into reading, but across all genres. Some of the titles she buys, I'm just like, oh, really? She's like, you should try it. And I keep meaning to do it, but then it's just so tempting. You've got your pile of books, and I'm like, oh, no, I'll just read that because I know I'll like that one. But yeah.
I think it's back to reading for escapism, reading stuff that you know you're going to enjoy. Yeah. So if you could live or work among one of the communities in your books, which one would it be and why? We'll start with Helen.
Oh, I think, well, at the moment I'm writing New York Ever After book 7. I think I'd love to live at that Inglenook Inn, because that's part of the setting for this one, which was obviously book 2, which was Snowflakes and Mistletoe at the Inglenook Inn. It's in the Greenwich Village in New York, so you're right in the hub of it. I'd love to live there, I think, and just be there and around New York for a bit. And then, of course, we've got Inglenook Falls, where some of the characters have gone and taken their stories. So Cleo from book 1, she ended up opening her knitting box out in Inglenook Falls, which is Connecticut. So I think I'd like to go there.
I just love those words, Inglenook Inn and Inglenook Falls. They just sound so delicious.
I really like it. Oh, yeah, I'd always planned to do a spin-off series, like an Inglenook Falls series. So I wanted to call it something that I really loved, like the name. But I never got around to doing a spin-off, and it's something that's in discussion, so maybe.
Yeah, one day perhaps. Lovely. And what about yourself, Jo? Which community would you live or work in?
As much as I love the midwives, I couldn't be a midwife because I'm too squeamish and it's too much responsibility, and so I just couldn't. I don't know how. They're amazing to me that they do that job and have that level of responsibility. So it'd have to be Seabreeze Farm for me, because it is my childhood. I did live more or less that life. You know, my sister is one still for rescuing animals and having every kind of animal that you could possibly imagine. She had a goat when my children were little, and they had a service at the church opposite the village school, and I took her goat with me because it was an animal blessing service, and it ate the vicar's order of service out of her hand. So a lot of the things that go into the Seabreeze Farm books are things that have happened either in our childhood or you know, as adults. We both have a love of animals. My sister is animal crazy and has every kind, so you know, she'll ring me up and say we've got a new foal, come down and see it and things like that. So I feel a little bit like we have lived our life on Seabreeze Farm. I was also born a stone's throw from the English Channel, where the Seabreeze Farm series is set on the cliffs overlooking the English Channel. So it feels, when I write those stories, like coming home a little bit for me anyway. So I think I have to choose that.
That sounds lovely, really nice. And for me, I love all the communities, but I would probably have pushed go for Hedgehog Hollow, as that community's just been absolutely amazing. They've pulled together when all sorts of horrible things have happened at the hands of the Grimes family, and Samantha has been so welcomed there. And who wouldn't want to be surrounded by stunning countryside and see gorgeous animals every day? Hedgehogs, little hoglets. I got to feed a hoglet the other day. It was absolutely amazing. So
your pictures are lovely.
I know, thank you. Yeah, special moment. So yeah, I would probably go for Hedgehog Hollow. Now we've got welcome along Mary. Mary's joined us a little bit later, so better late than never. Lovely to see you here. Georgina has a great question for us. Have you ever found that your readers, so welcome along Georgina as well, have you ever found that your readers especially love a character that you hadn't expected to be such a big hit? And if that's happened, did you then give that character their own story in the series? Anybody like to answer this? Because maybe that resonates.
Everybody loves Gwen in the Cornish Midwife series. I set her up to be slightly embarrassing and awkward. She likes to put her foot in it. She's mid to late 60s, but she likes nothing to talking about her sex life with her husband Barry and embarrassing the rest of the midwives. But my editor completely loves her, and so do a lot of readers. She hasn't had her own story yet, but she's going to get a much bigger part in one of the future midwives. So she'll either be the primary or secondary character in one of the midwives. I had expected her to be sort of a bit embarrassing and a bit annoying, but actually readers have taken her to their heart. She's the queen of the double entendre, and they absolutely love her. So it's good fun to write because she can say whatever she likes.
She is great. Yeah.
Which is really nice, which you wouldn't do in real life, but Gwen just does. So
and Helen, you raised your paw, so I'm assuming that you got one into that as well.
Well, when I was writing the Magnolia Creek series, somebody mentioned someone who was a real secondary character, and I just thought, I haven't even thought of telling her story. She was so minor that I thought I couldn't believe that this person had pointed her out. She was really that minor. But I ended up writing her story for book 3 and bringing her to the community because she was like a city girl and had all this trouble with her job. So yeah, it's quite nice when readers do that, especially when normally readers like the characters that I expect them to like and dislike the characters that I think they really will dislike. And you can get, like, readers can get as wound up as you can, you know, when you get annoyed at what your characters are doing and you think, oh, they're just so terrible. And you hear from readers and they say, oh, what they did was awful. I quite like hearing that, though, because it means they've felt that the character was real.
Yeah.
No, I know you had some with Samantha, didn't you, in Hedgehog Hollow? Some people didn't like things that she did.
Yeah, people think you know, she's a pushover and but she's not. She's actually she's a peacekeeper, and if there isn't a reason to cause a big argument and a conflict, then she doesn't create that. She doesn't let people walk all over her. But part of her character arc across the whole series is to stand up for herself. And so I could only do that gradually because I've got 6 books where she needs to do it completely by the end of it.
Yeah.
But yeah, it is really flattering when people do, you know, get frustrated with a character, really like a character, really hate a character. I've had a few say, always tell such and such a story. So in my Welcome to Whitsborough Bay series, Claire connects with a character called Nia from her past, and I've been asked a few times to tell Nia's story, but the problem is in the 4th book I've actually told quite a bit of the background as to what happened to Nia, the second character, and so to write an entire book based on her, I've given away a lot of what happens in her past and her present. So I just don't think there's mileage in it. But, you know, never say never. But quite often with the Hedgehog Hollow series, I've got people getting in touch saying, oh, would you write about this person? And that's already planned and I'm already going to. So I haven't had to change it. But great question, that. And a question from Patrick. What makes you decide to use fictional locations versus real ones? So we're getting towards the end of time. So just a kind of quick answer there. So Helen, what about you?
I find it's easier. You've just got so much more flexibility. You can put businesses where you want, have whatever people you like. So with my New York series, obviously New York is real, but I wanted to have a fictitious place, so like your Inglenook Inn, and then I have my Inglenook Falls as well. I just think it becomes like a whole new world for your book, and that's part of the magic of it, I think, and the escapism is that it's not somewhere anyone's ever been before, but they could quite imagine themselves going there. When I talked to my mum last, I said, oh, next time I come up, I might stop off in, I said, I'm going to stop off in Heritage Cove. And I went, no, I'm not. I'm going to stop off at Walberswick, which is a place that I've been to and I based the high street on Heritage Cove. That was quite funny.
I do the same with Whitsborough Bay. I say, I'm just nipping into Whitsborough Bay. Then no, Scarborough. Scarborough's where I'm going, but it feels like Whitsborough Bay to me. Yeah, I mean, for me, from the very beginning, I made the decision right from the start I was going to write somewhere that was fictional, because then you couldn't get somebody go, oh, that street's not there, and it would take 10 minutes, not 15 minutes to get from there to there, and the number 7 bus doesn't run anymore, and you just, I can't cope with those sort of negative, pedantic reviews. So fictional, predominantly modelled on real places, so geographically somebody knows what we're talking about, but fictional all the way. As you say, can add to it, can take away from it, can change things, can do what I want with it. I saw a book cover for Making Wishes at Bayview which had a river on it. I was like, oh, there isn't a river in Whitsborough Bay, but there could be. I'll just write one in there because I love that cover. And so you can do that when you have something fictional. What about yourself, Jo?
Very similar, I think. Just what both of you guys said. You can have, it can be your world, can't it? You can make it however you want. You can put things where you want them, and you can add to it as the series continues to extend. You can expand that world. And as I said, with the Port Agnes, Port Tremelian, and Port Cara, I've been able to make them linked along the whole of the Atlantic, because I've taken over the whole Atlantic coast in Cornwall now. It's all mine. I've named it all. You can just have that in a fictional location. You can have that, which you couldn't do otherwise.
And we will finish. We had a question that says, what's your next release and what can we expect from you beyond that? Any new communities? Which very much echoes what Ian Wilford has asked, which is a big question. What can we look forward from in 2023 and any new locations? So, Jo, would you like to start there?
Yeah, I don't really know what's going to happen. There is going to be an extension of the Cornish Midwife to book 7. As I said, I think it'll probably go beyond there. I'm just coming to the end of my first 12-book contract with Boldwood, so I'm not quite sure what's next for me, really. But I think there will be some continuation of the 2 series that I've got currently in place, which is Seabreeze Farm and The Midwives. But I'd also like to set a whole brand new community based around a bookshop and a group of people who work there. But it's more moving into the mystery and murder mystery element if that goes ahead. So watch this space. But I'll let you know when I do, Ian, because I'm not quite sure yet.
And I know more about that idea, and it sounds fabulous. So I'm sure it will appear on the pages very soon. What about yourself, Helen?
My next release is Finding Happiness at Heritage View, which is Heritage Cove, obviously. And at the moment, I'm working on New York Book 7. So that will be coming out next year, I think in April. And I have 2 more books on my contract to write, and I haven't really decided what we're going to do yet. We don't really know. So we're going to see how we feel about that. Oh, actually, no, sorry. I do know. I've got to write another Heritage Cove book. Sorry. So that will be a Christmas book for next year. And after that, I don't know what I'm going to do. So it might be continuing a New York one, or it might be some kind of spin-off we've talked about, but I think we'll have to wait and see. Get these 2 books written first and then make some decisions.
Oh, exciting. So for me, Chasing Dreams at Hedgehog Hollow is out on Tuesday. So that's my next one. And then the final book in that series, as I said earlier, out on 6th of September. That is Hedgehog Hollow in that series complete. My January release, which I am about to start writing this week, will be a standalone story, slightly lighter in tone than some of the books that I've written recently, or at least that is a plan. My characters have a habit of going, do you know what? There's this going on in the background. Let's just throw that into the story. So we'll see where they take it. And the community, it's going to be linked to Hedgehog Hollow. It's not a Hedgehog Hollow story, but Hedgehog Hollow will feature in it. And so will a character that has appeared in the Hedgehog Hollow series, but hasn't appeared very much, which is Fizz's brother, Barney. And it's going to be set at his farm. And that is called Bumblebee Barn, which is an exclusive reveal there. Bumblebee Barn is only mentioned by name in Hedgehog Hollow 6. And I've never described the farm, I've never described Barney, so I'm looking forward to delving into a new setting, and I think it'll be a little treat for those who don't really want me to have let go of Hedgehog Hollow. They will get to see what is happening. But beyond that, I have an exciting new location. In April, there will be one more Starfish Cafe book out, Summer Nights at the Starfish Cafe, and then I dive into a brand new community, a brand new setting. I move across to the other side of the country, to the beautiful Lake District, and more specifically Derwent Water, which is one of my favourite places in the whole wide world. And I've got ideas for a really, really big series that's set there, but I can't give any more details about that because I don't want anybody to nick them. But also, it's not all fully finalised just yet. But Jo and Helen do know what that's all about.
You trust us not to nick them, don't you, Jessica?
Yeah, I do trust you because I know where you both live, so I would have to come and help you with marshmallows or something. So thank you so much, everybody. That has taken us just about to the hour. I don't know about Helen and Jo, but I'm hungry. I haven't had breakfast or lunch, so I'm dying to dive in for some food in a moment. A huge thank you to Jo and Helen for joining me today and having a lovely chat. Thank you to everyone who's listened in and for all the great questions. I think we did get a chance to answer them all, but if we didn't, we'll go through and just add some answers into those. And this will be available shortly on Catch Up if you want to listen again to any part of it.
And a big thank you to you. Sorry to cut you over, for being our brown out as always, having us organised and keeping us all in check. It's always so much easier when you do it, isn't it, Helen?
Oh, it is so much easier when you lead the way.
Yeah, it's me with my brown owl head, as Jo says, and 20 odd years as an interviewer. I can't resist taking the chairing position and asking the questions. So, Helen, any final words from you?
No, I haven't. Thank you, everyone, for listening. It's very nice to do a video with two such wonderful writers and friends.
Oh, bless you. Thank you. Well, you can see, so next week, is yours out next week as well, Helen, your Heritage book?
It is. I've got 2 more re-releases this week for New York, books 3 and 4. Oh, no, it's not. I think it's July. Yeah.
The week after. Okay,
I've lost, because I've had so many backlists coming out. I really lose track. It's all in my
diary. Launch party.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Launch party.
Oh, yeah.
Champagne every day. You know how glamorous our lives are.
Yeah, Helen's just been sat on the chaise, having grapes popped into her mouth as she's had double release day after double release day. So yeah, the Hedgehogs and the Midwives are back next week, and then Heritage View, I think the week after, therefore. So do watch out for those. Thank you, everybody. Enjoy the rest of your Tuesday. Bye bye.